Afghanistan has fallen to the Taliban. This is huge international news, so here's a crash course with all the basics that you need to know. The Taliban is an ultra-fundamentalist Islamist militant group that controlled most of Afghanistan during the 90s. Although Afghanistan used to be relatively well-off and progressive, this country has known nothing but war for the past 4 decades. And the harsh rule of the Taliban saw human rights, particularly women's rights, decimated. In 2001, the terrorist group Al-Qaeda carried out the 9/11 attacks. They were based in Afghanistan, and President Bush said the Taliban government had refused to hand over Al-Qaeda's leadership, and so they invaded. They were joined by Australian troops and NATO, and honestly, by the end of 2001, the US had basically won. The recently ousted Taliban actually offered a ceasefire agreement then, but the US government rejected it. But here's the thing, Afghanistan geographically is basically impossible to conquer for long, and coalition troops spent the next 20 years struggling to keep the Taliban at bay, all while trying and failing to establish a new democratic-ish Afghan government, which always struggled to gain legitimacy and was racked with corruption issues. After more than a decade, the West finally conceded that this long war was basically unwinnable and slowly started withdrawing troops. Eventually, it was Trump who actually signed a deal with the Taliban, agreeing that all US troops would leave by May 1st of this year. And in exchange, the militant organisation would stop being friends with terrorist groups and generally reduce violence. Basically, the US hoped that even if the Taliban did break this promise, the new Afghan government was now strong enough to hold them back. They were not. As soon as Western troops started leaving once and for all, the Taliban started taking over territories, and reports of war crimes and massacres followed them. By the start of August, major cities neighbouring the capital of Kabul were starting to fall, and by Sunday, Kabul was the only city left. The Afghan president decided it would be pointlessly violent to fight, and instead secretly fled, probably to Uzbekistan. Without really much resistance, the Taliban entered the city, took over the palace, and declared themselves the new government. Now those who helped coalition troops are terrified of violent reprisals, and many, particularly women, fear the Taliban will reinstate their repressive fundamentalist rule. 20 years of war, more than 172,000 people killed, $1 trillion spent, and it all came undone in a matter of days.